going to speak about perfectly normal stuff today. Fish gods, the seven-headed serpent, and the law of one. So Plato is famous for talking about Atlantis and the Timaeus and the Critias. He also said this, that Egypt had recorded and kept eternally the wisdom of the old times, all coming from time immemorial when gods governed the earth in the dawn of civilization. Now, a lot of these scholars and chroniclers talk about this lost world of Atlantis being, you know, the place that of the Hesperides and Hyperborea, where people lived twice as long, and it was a wonderful place where the gods, you know, lived. And in Greek mythology, that's the place of the Titans and Atlas and Poseidon. So they're basically talking about this continent in the middle of the Atlantic that, you know, existed deep into antiquity. Now, Plato is talking here about his visits to the Library of Alexandria and how Casey says that the Atlantean survivors showed up and were the founders of the Egyptian civilization. And it is a quite sophisticated and strange and metaphysically based culture. If you really delve into the Book of the Dead and the oral traditions and esoteric teachings in Egypt, you will find that out as well. So there is literary evidence of Greek individuals visiting Egypt, especially to acquire knowledge, Herodotus and Plato. Both these gentlemen visited the Library of Alexandria, you know, and if the library were standing today, we wouldn't have this conversation because the records would exist of Atlantis. But one of the skeptics' arguments is Plato is the only one who talked about Atlantis as a you know, historical fact, which isn't true. Herodotus lived before Plato and spoke of Atlantis, and other chroniclers did too, including Homer, who talked about Giza. So the Library of Alexandria existed in the distant past and was destroyed in a series of fires, which is a bummer. So here is Herodotus, the father of history. Near the salt hill in a mountain named Atlas, after this mountain, these received their names, for they are called Atlanteans. Remember, he was born before Plato. He also refers to the sea beyond the Pillars of Heracles as the Sea of Atlantis. There's a picture of one of the representations of what Atlantis was supposed to look like. You know, one of the skeptics' arguments is there is no way that Atlantis could have existed, or Lemuria in the Pacific. You know, it is not allowed for with current geological theory. Plate tectonics, you know, cannot describe these events. But I tend to think that a lot of the pillars of our science are really built on a house of sand, that plate tectonics is a flawed theory. And there's a lot of criticism of these theories. And there's just a prevailing paradigm or like a scientific cult around these ideas, where they are considered an incontrovertible truth the same way as like the science that makes your cell phone work, which just clearly isn't true. It's just an educated guess. So at first it seems like this grand theory, like just like out of Africa. Oh, it makes perfect sense, you know, Clovis barrier, you know, everything fits together. And then these cracks appear, and then these kind of absurd bridge theories are created to hold the whole shitty paradigm up. And some of the bridge theories are absolutely absurd, but there are agenda-invested intellectuals who are like, I've been teaching this for 40 years, or, you know, they view the alternative side as like an enemy in politics and religion. So instead of meeting in the middle and blending science and spirituality like the ancients did, we have these clear divisions of kind of the alternative side and the scientific side. And I say, you know, you meet in the middle. Like I try to work with really cool professionals, archaeologists on digs, and, you know, people who are just open to these ideas, or at the very least, they're not going to, be disrespectful of how you think. So anyways, David Pratt wrote this really interesting article where he talks about, you know, basically his doubts about plate tectonics. This paper looks at the challenges confronting plate tectonics, the ruling paradigm in the earth sciences. The classical model of thin lithospheric plates moving over global asthenosphere is shown to be impossible. Evidence is presented that appears to contradict continental drift, seafloor spreading, and subduction, and the claim that the ocean crust is relatively young. The problems posed by vertical tectonic movements are reviewed, including evidence for large areas of submerged continental crust in today's oceans. It is concluded that the fundamental tenets of plate tectonics must be wrong, or might be wrong. The way this problem is solved is to take core samples in the middle Atlantic range near the Azores, where Atlantis was supposed to exist, or off the coast of California, where it's clear that like rivers that form these rivulets and other things are submerged deep under the ocean, and see exactly when these areas were submerged. So I'm not against science, I am just open to new ideas about the past. And I believe with the right funding, this might happen. So we had the cataclysm we spoke of, and basically science is now verifying that this great flood that was talked about, this ancient cataclysm that ended at Atlantis, is actually a scientific fact. We have these creator gods who show up all around the world after the flood as well, creating humans out of clay, just like in Genesis. And here we have Khnum, the androgynous god who created humans, and he has 6 fingers. There are androgynous creator gods found all around the planet. Now, I've got into this in more detail in other lectures in the series, but I just want to hit on some of these ideas of who these creator gods were. Casey says, in the early days of Milius's rule, the separation of the sexes had not yet begun to take place. Though male in their outward aspect, the androgynous sons of God embodied within themselves the nature of both male and female in one person. By turning to the creative forces, they could become channels to bring into being androgynous progeny after their own kind, imbued with a double soul and a double-sex body. In this way, sexual intercourse was unnecessary means of propagation. That's a bummer. But that was the idea, promulgated by Zeus and others, that basically androgynous beings, were the first humans, if you will, these creator gods. The Babylonian expedition, where H.V. Hilprecht says the same thing. Now remember, Casey's saying this with an 8th grade education in a trance state, given like health readings. He's talking about androgyny. And I even avoided this idea for years. I'm like, it's so weird. It's like, what the hell are people going to think? But anyways, this androgynous nature, this ability to beget out of himself his own ego, this self-existence is inherent in each and every god of the Sumerians. All Sumerian gods are androgynous. And this dude here, Oannes, the fish god who brought knowledge of civilization to the Sumerians, is known to be androgynous. It is not a male, it is like a sexless being, like an amphibious creature who shows up. And this fish god shows up all around the world. I will get into that. So Manly P. Hall is a great mystic and teacher of Freemasonry. Ronald Reagan was one of his students. This is what he has to say. The mythologies of many nations contain accounts of gods who came out of the sea. Certain shamans among the American Indians tell of holy men dressed in birds' feathers and wampum who arose out of the blue waters and instructed them in the arts and crafts. Among the legends of the Chaldeans is that of Oannes, a partly amphibious creature who came out of the sea and taught the savage peoples along the shore to read and write, till the soil, cultivate herbs for healing, study the stars, establish rational forms of government, and become conversant with the sacred mysteries. That's another thing. These gods taught the sacred mystery school teachings that, the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons both claim go back to Atlantis. That's where they say all the teachings came from. There's a lot of intrigue around secret society mysteries and stuff like that, but they've kept alive these sacred mysteries through all these dark ages, and they specifically state that they go all the way back to Atlantis. So these fish gods show up everywhere. Here is Dagon, the Philistine fish god. He has a beard, or it has a beard and breasts. It is portrayed as androgynous. Here's our friend Oannes with his nice man bag right there. The Nomo archetype is from the Dogon people. Now, this is a real key component to the story. Here are the Dogon. Ogamateli, the shaman, the blind shaman of the Dogon, was interviewed by French anthropologists in the 30s when the French invaded Mali, Africa, and colonized it. And what this Dogon shaman told them was that these androgynous fish beings showed up from the Sirius star system and taught, the arts of civilization and star knowledge to these people. And Robert Temple writes about the star knowledge in the Sirius Mystery. There's a lot been talked about how sophisticated the Dogon were, but this elder, well versed in the oral traditions of his people, basically and specifically states that these fish gods were androgynous and extraterrestrial. So you find them all around the world promulgating this knowledge. Here is a Nomo double-headed statue, male and female, portraying the androgynous nature of these gods. Here is Fuxi Nua, the androgynous fish god of China. Here is from a temple tomb. So you see the androgynous fish god being portrayed. Now this being taught the I Ching, which is an utterly complex divination system, the arts of civilization and cultivation, math and geometry, once again, and we know how sophisticated China is, just like down in ancient Peru, where the androgynous Viracocha shows up, we find, the after effects of these beings, what builds up is these highly sophisticated civilizations. So Olokun, the fish god, androgynous in West Africa, is revered still to this day with festivals. These ancient peoples, whether it's a parade of giants in England or worshiping a fish god in Africa, these more indigenously connected people just remember, like through an ancestral lineage, these ideas, and they just keep going through time because there is some truth, there is a kernel of truth here. So Matsya, Vishnu, they were fish gods in India. They were androgynous, sometimes presented as male and female, but usually represented as an androgynous being with like breasts and beards or two heads that are male and female. And they are specifically stated as androgynous. So Viracocha, this is the Bennett monolith. I believe it's of Viracocha. He was known to be androgynous. The historical record talks about it. And the Bennett monolith here in the museum, I think in Bolivia, it has fish scales all over it, representing this giant fish god, this wisdom keeper. So we know that Viracocha taught the arts of civilization. He emerged from Lake Titicaca, just like Atlantis emerged from the Persian Gulf. And you will see that this fish god actually spent his nights sleeping in the Persian Gulf and teaching men by day and taking no food during the day. If I don't get into it here, I got into it in my other talks about these matters, but it is specifically stated. It's not like I conjured this up. I'm just piecing this story together. So Viracocha is a wisdom keeper who shows up who's androgynous. Now, Quetzalcoatl, sometimes it can be conflated and this may be the same being, but this is the god of the Olmec in the Maya, Quetzalcoatl. He is born of Omiteotl, the androgynous god, and he is a demigod offspring of this androgynous creation. I don't know specifically if he was considered androgynous or if it was, but his dad was. He has a man bag as well, which is very strange because the fish god has that man bag in Samaria on the other side of the planet or the ocean. Zeus also talks about our first state was androgynous in Zeus. That's funny. Plato talks about our first state being androgynous, and Zeus, cut us down the middle and created male and female. Some of the androgynous gods to be found all around the planet are, there's an immense amount. It's an entirely ubiquitous phenomenon. Native American, like the Zuni elders, had shamans who were androgynous. There are androgynous gods in all these cultures. It's just, quite a thing. And I never, like I said, I stayed away from this idea, and now I realize the entire world is littered with androgynous gods and all this mythology around our androgyny being our first state. So I was down in Olmec land, the ancient predecessors of the Maya, who are, in their own right, a very sophisticated culture, and they have an androgynous god, this weird, like, space being, humano asexuado. So there's a lot of two-headed statues that represent androgyny, like the Ayin Ghazal bust from 8200 BC. In the Olmec land, you have these androgynous two-headed statues as well. Once again, you have Quetzalcoatl with the man bag, who is androgynous. So Greek, Sumerian, Babylonian, Laotian, Native American, Maori, Yoruba, Christian, Chinese, Peruvian, and Muslim sources, among others, all claim humans were created out of the clay of the earth in supernatural fashion. So you have this theory all around the world. Here you have the six-fingered androgynous creator god, Khnum, who shows up after the flood, creating humans on a potter's wheel. Now, these could be these ancient stories beyond, 10,000 years ago. But the point is, these beings who are androgynous and oftentimes amphibious are known to have created humans, out of the dust in some form of, it's like the Sumerian creation epic. It's like blood mixed with clay or genetic material mixed with clay somehow created humans. That is the pervasive and specific story all around the world. So the Temple of Enoch was dedicated to androgynous, nameless, omnipotent creator god, which manifested itself as both male and the female entity, deity. Here he is creating humans again on the potter's wheel. And there is Thoth writing down how many years this being would live. And as I said before, at the Temple of Enoch, this being had 6 fingers. Viracocha, who I just talked about, is also portrayed as a hybrid being oftentimes, or this fish god or birdman. He has 6 toes right there from the German museum. He's also on a pot from Tiwanaku, 600 BC, with 6 fingers. So Casey simply compares this type of conception with that of the lowly amoeba, and who pushes out from within itself another separate body, splitting its own gene pool. That's how these androgynous beings were supposed to create or procreate. So we have on Boa Island in Ireland this androgynous god who is male and female, the double-headed statue. You find this all around the world. And as I spoke about before, there are these statues that are portrayed as androgynous everywhere. So Eruditus explores the idea of androgynous created deities in his paper, The First Adam, Androgyny, and the Ayin Ghazal Two-Headed Busts. So these are super ancient statues. In fact, some of the most ancient statues in the world portray polydactylism, 6 fingers and 6 toes associated with the giant of Gath in the Bible, and androgyny. These ancestors or creator gods or this ancestor worship is basically identified in androgynous and polydactylous form, as odd as that sounds, but not so odd if the story is actually true. So Ziffer says the following: I would like to suggest that these statues represented mythical ancestors from the dawn of mankind, and that the 2-headed busts among them represent the first human being, the androgynous prototype of humanity. So we have a sober academic basically joining the story through his own personal research. And in fact, I find I read through mountains of academic papers, and I find individually there are academics who they get a part of the story, like, wow, 6 fingers and 6 toes was revered as a divine trait, in this Pueblo community or in Malta in ancient times. And then when you piece it all together, you get this larger picture like I'm trying to portray here. So remember the Nomo double-headed twin statue of their amphibious androgynous god. On the right from Gaziantep, I think about 5000 BC, we have a statue from Turkey that represents that. Catalhayuk in 6500 BC, these super ancient statues are basically, or are definitely portraying androgyny. This is a really interesting one because it might tell us that Göbekli Tepe, which is nearly 12,000 years old, is representing on the statues androgyny as well. So at Kilisik, near the town of Arimayan in southeast Anatolia, just over 50 miles away from Göbekli Tepe, a mini T-shaped figure was found in 1965. So this is contemporaneous with Göbekli Tepe. The statue, I think, is like 11,000 years old. So Mark Verhoeven, the academic, in 2001 wrote a paper where he claims this is an androgynous statue. And it, with a vulva, with a penis, with both body parts being portrayed as an androgynous being. So that's important because it hooks up with Göbekli Tepe. I'll show you in a second. So do the T-shapes therefore represent the great ancestor of those who offer the local hunter-gatherer communities the remedy for their proposed catastrophophobia in the centuries following the aftermath of the Younger Dryas boundary impact event? Question. I'm sorry, Andrew Collins, I am quoting right here, my friend, who has written extensively about Göbekli Tepe. Genesis of the Gods is one of his books. Andrew, like Graham Hancock, is actually has this mystical prophetic side. You know, he essentially established and predicted that more ancient sites, or the origination point of this current cycle of civilization, would be found in Turkey in his book Angels of from what is it, Ashes to Angels, or Angels to Ashes. Sorry, Andrew. But anyways, I'm giving credit to both these great researchers. You know, just like Hancock went on and on about this lost civilization, then Göbekli Tepe shows up and the Younger Dryas impact shows up. So right here is the Killer 6 statue. Here is Navali Chori, which is a little newer than Göbekli Tepe. There is Urfa Man. So all these images here, that's Göbekli Tepe, they're around the same time frame, you know, super ancient sites. That's androgynous. Look at the arms and everything like that. I contend that you find androgyny, not in Urfa Man, but at the two T-shaped pillars. You can see the similarities, the hands around the waist. And my point is, at the very least, there is a statue as old as the oldest temple site on Earth that is displaying androgyny. And then hooked it up with Ayin Ghazal and statues around the entire planet. And you're seeing that these creator gods, these androgynous beings, are unbelievably ubiquitous. So in Qumran, after Edgar Cayce died, a couple of years later, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Cayce talked about the sons of Belial. He talked about the sons and daughters of the Law of One, this ancient, you know, religion of like selfless service to mankind. And then the sons and daughters of darkness, who created all whacked out hybrid beings, and they were the black sorcerers, you know, alluded to in like Lord of the Rings and you know, epic stories like that. So he talked about Belial over and over again as the son of darkness, leading the dark forces in Atlantis in this ancient wizard's war, if you know, like Harry Potter on steroids. But a large number of references to Belial are evidenced in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered at Qumran from 1948. In the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls says, Belial is the leader of the Sons of Darkness. So Cayce is saying these strange and specific things, once again, in a trance-like state with an 8th grade education, and he's laying out this picture. And then we find the Dead Sea Scrolls, after he's dead, verifies this. In fact, Cayce said that there were female students and initiates into the Essenes, and that wasn't believed either until the Dead Sea Scrolls proved that. He also said that the Nile flowed backwards at one point, which has been proven by science. So Cayce has been prophetically true about a lot of these ideas about the past. So back to the idea of the fish god showing up. We find these fish gods, they're androgynous, they're carrying man bags all around the planet. And I want to point to, over in Mexico, this 7-headed serpent hybrid weirdo with fish scales has a man bag. You know, that's pretty specific. You know, this is beyond coincidence. That's why I do this. I just think it's fascinating to piece this together. I'm like, you tell me there's no story here? You know, that it's just this mundane, you know, story of the past, and none of this mythological garbage means anything. You know, is it like that? I doubt it. You know, and I'll say that the 7-headed figure, 7-headed dragon, 7-headed serpent is found all around the world. And in Siberia recently, this petroglyph was found. I think it's 2000 BC, this 7-headed being. So we know from Sumeria that the goddess slew the 7-headed dragon. That this is a part of what's going on, like I'll show in a second, like King Arthur slays the 7-headed dragon or the 7-headed serpent. There are metaphysical reasons for that, the metaphor of the 7-headed dragon and serpent I will get to in a second. So here, King Arthur, he is slaying the 7-headed dragon. And I will explain what that means in esoteric terms in a minute. Manly P. Hall has this to say: in Indian symbolism, the serpent, especially the great serpent, corroborates other evidence pointing to the presence of the mysteries on the North American continent. The flying serpent is the Atlantean token of the initiate, the seven-headed snake, representing the seven great Atlantean islands, the cities of Cibola, ? And also the seven great prehistoric schools of esoteric philosophy. In Angkor Wat and other places, you have Buddha being protected by the seven serpents. In ancient traditions of many cultures, it is the symbol of wisdom in eternity. In popular Christian lore, it is the symbol of the devil or the fallen angel. In the East, the serpent and the dragon have been the symbols of the sage or the wise man. In Buddhism, according to some traditions, Buddha was protected by nagas or serpents at birth and after his death. That's from Madame Blavatsky. So it's been the idea of the serpent, has been twisted around in Christian ways. And what it really represents is the chakra system or the energy system of the body, which when you deal with it in the correct way through meditation and other means, can lead to kundalini and enlightenment. So you see the seven-headed serpent here protecting Vishnu and protecting Buddha, and on and on and on. Here's Madame Blavatsky, and she has this to say: they are all seven-headed, the dragons and serpents of antiquity, one head for each race, and every head with seven hairs on it, as the allegory has it. The earliest initiates and adepts, or the wise men, for whom it is claimed that they were initiated into the mysteries of nature by the universal mind, represented by the highest angels, were named the serpents of wisdom and dragons. The feathered serpent, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, they're all named the serpent. At Chichen Itza with the serpents coming down. The serpent is basically, the path of wisdom in esoteric circles. Even the Aztec fertility goddess, her name, Chico-Macotl, is actually translated as the seven serpents. So you see the seven serpents here. So I've showed you examples all around the world of what, the seven-headed serpent or dragon. So once again, it is well beyond coincidence that this would appear everywhere. In fact, the Gnostics have the seven-headed dragon or the seven-headed serpent as part of their philosophy as well. So, when people think of Jesus sometimes, they think of like the fiery Baptist minister that tells you, you're going to burn in hell forever, some Jeff Sessions-like character. And that gives Christianity a bad name. It gives Jesus a bad name, because he'd be like the most liberal and open-minded freak walking the streets of anywhere he showed up this day. Somebody who was unconditionally loving. Not that liberals are always unconditionally loving. The point is that he was a humanitarian. He practiced forgiveness. He was like the Buddha, just this perfect example of peace and forgiveness. So he was more oriented to an Eastern way of philosophy rather than a Western one. So this is what Yogananda, the enlightened master, if you ever get a chance, read the autobiography of a yogi if you are interested in what enlightenment means and how to reach it. Jesus went very deep in teachings that appear on the surface to be simple, much deeper than most people understand. That he taught the entire yoga system, the scientific method of union with God, is evidenced in the Book of Revelation and the mystery of the seven stars and seven churches, and the seven angels and seven golden candlesticks. God realization is attained by opening the seven seals of these centers of spiritual perception to attain mastery over all astral powers of life and death, through which the soul ascends to liberation. Actually, there's on Netflix this documentary about Yogananda, and you can see all about his life. He was a true spiritual master. and all these ideas are tied up within, that I'll get into it in a minute, but that there is a quantum field that we are all connected to. We are basically experiencing this game of separation in life here, where we're renting bodies, for a number of years. So here is the seven-headed dragon in the Book of Revelation. And interestingly, I was on tour with Hugh Newman and J.J. Ainsworth recently, and I went to the ball court at Chichen Itza, and I was just drawn there, and I was told, to look at all the carvings on the wall. So I was drawn in there, and what I found was, see this being on the right, nailing down, it's the decapitated ball player with 7 serpents coming out of his head. So I went on the other side, and here he is again. 7 serpents coming from his head, and he won the game and got decapitated. And there were some who believe that it wasn't about like this ritual sacrifice, that there was a very esoteric meaning, a metaphysical meaning behind this, which Hunbat's men talked about. In his book, the great Mayan wisdom keeper, Hunbat's Men, he says, concludes that the Mayan religion was based around a system of 7 energy centers, very similar to the Hindu chakras. He also notes that the Buddha was bitten by a 7-headed serpent at the river of initiation. So basically this philosophy is that there are 7 energy systems in the body, and through meditation and self-reflection, you can activate them to achieve enlightenment. And this is one of Casey's reading. Entity was in the Atlantean land when there were those activities just prior to the second upheaval. The entity was among the children of the law of one. The highest service an entity may render to the creative energy, and the answer of the divine from within comes in being mindful of the sons and daughters of men, that man may become one with the creative energy, yet no self to be self.
Okay, so today we're going to look at the study of earth grids and the enchantment of the landscape. Now this is a story that goes way back several hundred, potentially thousands of years, with this idea that the earth has a geometrical nature, and that the ancients understood this and would place sites all around the planet connected up into a massive geomantic system. So I've been looking at this for many years. I wrote a book called Earth Grids in 2008, and I've been researching ever since, looking at the connections between these sites all around the world, the earth energies and the geodetic systems that connect them all up. One of my big inspirations was John Michel. He was really a mentor of mine. He founded the Megalithomania conference with myself and John Martineau and Gareth Mills. And his book, The View Over Atlantis, that came out in 1969, was a breakthrough book. And he really believed, as paraphrased here, that the earth was like a huge scientific instrument, and sites were placed across the landscape, connecting up energetically, astronomically, and in a scientific system to bring enchantment to the people, to the land, fertility, to the animals, to the farms and the plant life and so on. And he really saw it as a kind of spiritual science of the ancients. So what we're going to look at today is this idea of earth grids, ley lines, earth energies, but let's just categorize a few things before we get into the crux of the information in this lecture. Geomancy, for instance, is a word that you'll probably hear a lot in this world. It's really about the divination of the earth. It comes from the ancient Greek word geomantella, which means foresight of the earth, and it really is about understanding and tuning in to the planet and its energies. Geodesy or geodesy, and it really means division of the earth and the measure and representation of the planet. Archaeogeodesy is the same thing, but it's to do with the nature of point positioning, measure and representation of the earth, sometimes with astronomical alignments thrown in. Geometry really means earth measure, and it's concerned with questions of shape, size, relative position of figures and properties of space. Sacred geometry, number in space, and it's the sacred laws of earth measure and nature. Then we get on to the more esoteric terms. Ley lines or leys, it really is an alignment of 4 or more ancient sites, and this can be from any era, from the prehistoric right up to the Christian time. And it can be over any distance, but it has to be in a straight line. And this was first coined by Alfred Watkins in the 1920s. An earth circle is really an extension of a ley line, and it goes all the way around the planet, almost like cutting the earth in two. And we'll see examples of these in our ancient sites across the planet were lined up all around the planet. Archaeoastronomy is the alignment and orientation of sites to the sun, moon and stars at certain times of year or certain cycles. Earth energy lines, these are yin and yang energies that emanate from the Earth, and they often move in random, sinuous, serpentine ways across the surface of the planet. Similar to these are telluric currents, and these are alternating electric and magnetic currents that are from the Earth's magnetic field. They strengthen at sunrise and weaken at dusk, and they often form into spirals, and these are often recorded and noted and dowsed at ancient sites. And Earth grids is really all of these in one system, looking at the Earth as a representation of these different geometries and different systems in one whole grid. And so, before we begin, we really need to find the center. This is all about geomancy and geodesy. We have to find the center of the ancient landscape, and then you survey and you build sites from there. You find the energetic hotspot, which is often the geodetic, the exact center of a particular area, whether spiritually or physically. The most famous example really is the Great Pyramid, and it's thought now that the original prime meridian of the Earth was not through Greenwich, obviously, but it was actually through the Great Pyramid at Giza. And every ancient site, I mean, or many of them, relate to this particular spot, as though this is the omphalos, this is the geodetic axis mundi of the planet, and everything else came from that. And it does appear that may be the case, because even when Napoleon and his surveyors in the late 1700s were surveying Egypt and other areas, they realized that the division of it cut the delta region into two equal portions, and these emanated from the corners of the Great Pyramid. So not only do you have this happening, you know, geodetically in a sort of enclosed area, you also have the fact that most landmass from this particular spot is on the planet. So this is at the center of the Earth's landmass. And there's other reasons why it may have been chosen, which we'll get into during the lecture. We find similar examples of finding the sacred center in Britain, for example. This is an illustration by John Michel, who wrote a book about finding the center and the sacred center of different cultures. And in Britain, the most prominent one really is the Isle of Man, which has its own laws, has its own kind of government there, and it's the center of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, almost exactly. If you take that as the center and draw a line between them and then create a circle around you, and you pretty much have the whole of Britain encoded within it. And also the symbolism we find on the Isle of Man does represent this as well. We also have Nordic, Greek, Celtic and many other traditions around the world where they sought to find their navel of the world. It was their navel, it was their center. May not have been the actual center, but it was their center. And this would be the axis or the rock or the mound where the king or the leader would survey his domain and give laws from his sacred spot. And when we look at Giza, we find that even Graham Hancock noted this in his 1998 book, Heaven's Mirror. He developed a theory of longitudinal distribution of sacred sites based upon precessional numbers. These are numbers that are encoded into the precession of the equinox, 25,980 year cycle. And these are all harmonic numbers such as 72, 144, 108, etc. But he also found not only that the sites were related longitudinally from Giza, they all were harmonic distances, harmonic degrees apart, but he also accidentally found that they were based upon pentagonal geometry. The numbers of precession are the internal angles of pentagons, suggesting that the precession of the equinoxes is directly related to sacred geometry, i.e. pentagons, and possibly dodecahedral geometries, which we'll see later. So was this a lost universal pattern yet to be discovered? Here's some examples that was published by I believe Rand Flemath in his book The Atlantis Blueprint, and he worked upon similar principles using phi as the divisions on certain parts of the world. And you can see how some of the most important sites around the world, such as Tiwanaku, Kapan, Teotihuacan, etc., are harmonic distances away from Giza. And the same principles can be found on the left column here. We have some examples that we put in the Earth Grids book of harmonic longitudes from Giza. You can see some fine examples. And on the right, we forget Giza and look at distances between other sites, finding the same number systems, the same distance of harmonic degrees apart. So all around the world, not just from Giza, but other cultures, even before and after Giza and the Egyptian civilization, understood where to put sites. It was part of the system, it was part of a great survey, and it was part of a tradition that was probably passed down through multiple generations to maintain these traditions partly. So it's very interesting that even though it was only in the 1700s that John Harrison understood longitude and it became public as such, that this was known about by the ancient peoples many, many thousands of years ago all over the planet. And just to look at it from another level, the importance of the Great Pyramid itself, it appears to have been designed and built to represent the Earth, or certainly the Northern Hemisphere. The height and perimeter of the Great Pyramid multiplied by 43,200, which is one of these processional numbers, yields figures very close to the modern polar radius and equatorial circumference. The base length of the pyramid is also precisely 1/8 of a minute of degree of the Earth's polar circumference. And so we're finding Earth measurements very simply, in very simple terms, within the Great Pyramid's dimensions. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really, because if you look more deeply into the Great Pyramid, you kind of see that it is really a repository of ancient knowledge, a repository of ancient mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and very high wisdom. And I believe it was partly maintained and partly built to be a permanent structure to encode all these different high levels of geometry, mathematics, and technologies and energies and so forth. And it was almost deliberately created to withstand many thousands of years of vandalism, destruction, and ignorance, to maintain this high level of intelligence, sophistication, and consciousness on the planet. I think the same can be said for many other sites around the world, and that's why they were built with earth and stone, so they would last and be almost impossible to destroy. There are other elements of this sacred science found in Egypt. There's good evidence now that I've been looking into is the idea of the sacred quarry where the stones were birthed from to create these temples. And even Klaus Schmidt, who was the excavator and real discoverer really of Göbekli Tepe, he quite in his book about Göbekli Tepe, he states, in ancient Egypt, the dragging and erecting of holy pillars was an important part of ritual events, and it seems there was no difference concerning the Stone Age T-pillars of Göbekli Tepe. And he believes that even the site of Göbekli Tepe, as people are realizing now, may have influenced ancient Egypt, or even the other way around, because there's evidence in Egypt that goes back many, many tens of thousands of years. But if you draw a line between Aswan Quarry, where the great obelisk is, and you see it there, this 1,168-ton unfinished obelisk carved out of granite, where many of the stones on the Giza Plateau came from, even inside the Great Pyramid itself. But if you actually draw a line between the exact center of the unfinished obelisk and go right to the center of the Great Pyramid, it's exactly 365.4 nautical miles. So this means that they were encoding the days of the year within distances between the quarrying of the granite and the placement in the Great Pyramid. So if this is a coincidence, it's a very big coincidence, but I don't think it was. And again, you can see that here. There's some very interesting scoop marks and evidence of high technology that we find within the quarry itself, which we find in other parts of the world. For example, on the right there, we've got an old, very interesting photo from Ollantaytambo in Peru. On the left, we have Aswan, the same kind of scoop marks that you find as almost like some kind of way they soften the stone and use technology to scoop the stone and shape it and so forth. Christopher Dunn has done some excellent research on this as well. We find other examples here. We have Machu Picchu. This is the Temple of the Three Windows, the outer wall. And again, especially on the bottom left there, you can see that it's almost puffed out, but they've scooped it out. It's a very strange phenomena. And how on earth could they do that with extremely hard crystalline granite? Again, we can see this at Sacsayhuaman. This is a photo of our group from a few years ago in Peru. And you can see scoop marks on many of the rocks here as though it's been softened. This again is from Ollantaytambo, again showing scoop marks. And this, unbelievably, is from Stonehenge, where we have almost identical technologies here, which seem to suggest this was a global understanding of how they created like a secret tradition of megalithic construction, which I believe was part of the purpose of maintaining this enchantment, as John Michel called it, of the landscape. And these are what's produced from the quarry in Aswan, several hundred miles north of there. This is the Giza Plateau. This is Menkare's pyramid, the smaller pyramid on the Giza Plateau, but it's got beautiful, puffy, polygonal stonework all over the pyramid. Unbelievable technology, and you can still see some of it intact today. This is inside the Valley Temple. I managed to catch an orb in this one. Again, you see very sophisticated stonework. So who built these? Well, one idea is that giants might have done it, and we're going to get into that in another lecture. But we have to kind of question, what was really going on here. I think one of the ways to look at this is go back in time as far as we can and have a look at the early evidence of grids. One excellent place to look is the classic Book of Enoch, which was only rediscovered in 1773. It'd been in obscurity, been totally lost for at least 1500 years, and it was James Bruce who discovered a version of it in Ethiopia. And Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah, describes the fall of the Watchers, or the angels, who came down from supposedly Mount Hermon, and they fathered the Nephilim with human women and so forth. And in his book, he describes visits in flying machines, going to different parts of the world, having visionary experiences with these almost like light beings, you could call them. And he describes that. But one of the passages in it, and there's a few similar to this, having read the Book of Enoch quite thoroughly, this is a really interesting one because it almost describes a great survey of the planet. I'll just read this to you. And I saw in those days how long cords were given to the angels, and they took themselves wings and flew and went towards the north. And I asked an angel, saying unto him, why have they taken cords and gone off? And he replied, they've gone to measure, and these measures shall reveal all the secrets of the depths of the earth. And so what we have here is potentially an ancient survey, and this just fits in with this idea of even the information encoded within the pyramid and other structures. We have ancient maps that say similar things. They have very sophisticated mapping systems, even of Antarctica before it was free of ice, as you can see in this Orontius Finicus map from 1532. But the most famous one is the Pires Rez map. Pires Rez was a Turkish admiral. He produced this map in 1513. And he actually did it from many maps called Mappa Mundi. These are global maps that the Arabs had, and these were from the time of Alexander the Great, mostly from the Great Library of Alexandria. And he put this together in 1530, and basically he kind of mapped much of the planet, including coastlines that had not officially yet been discovered. So this really kind of changed people's theories when Charles Hapgood started putting this together in the 1950s and 60s, and he realized what they had here was evidence, very ancient evidence, compiled from much earlier maps going back thousands of years that mostly got destroyed in the Great Fire at the Library of Alexandria, and suggesting that this knowledge was known about for many, many thousands of years. We have traditions from different parts of the world, folklore and stories that describe this idea of some kind of earth grid around the planet. This is an image my brother Emmanuel put together. And this is an image of what's called Spider Grandmother Woman, and she was a Native American god or goddess, and it describes the story of how she spat into 2 handfuls of earth, and 2 brothers were created, and together they beat in a drum, and they created visions to manifest this energy to be pumped to the center of the earth, which was a great crystal, and then the energy would bounce off the crystal at the center, come back to the surface, and then it would create what they call spots of the thought, or power centers, or power spots, like a grid system around the planet. And so these are traditions that go way, way back, even into Native American folklore. There's other ideas about the earth which have been put forward. Even Plato himself kind of suggested that the earth, when viewed from above, resembles a ball made of 12 pieces of leather. And this would suggest he was talking about a dodecahedron, which is a 12-sided polygon, one of the Platonic solids. You can see an example in the Scottish stone sphere on the right there of what the dodecahedron would look like. It was later discovered by some Russian researchers that the mid-Atlantic ridge, if you placed a dodecahedron around the planet, it almost looks like the mid-Atlantic ridge almost forms the edges of a dodecahedron. So we'll get more into these geometries because they seem to be within the Earth itself. Another version that was put together in the early 1970s was by Ivan T. Sanderson in his 1972 article called 12 Devil's Graveyards Around the World. He put together a system of all the different places where the strange phenomena have been happening, like time dilations, disappearances, UFO abductions, all these weird phenomena, based upon the research of the Bermuda Triangle and the Devil's Triangle off the coast of Japan, and realized there were 12 areas around the world where there were these strange anomalous spots, including the North and South Pole and these 10 other ones, as you can see here. And he found that if you actually put that into a globe, into a 3D geometry, the points mark the vertices or points of an icosahedron. And so this, again, is another one of the Platonic solids, which is 20 triangular faces, and these 12 points where they would touch the surface. So it's very interesting. So it's almost like the first planetary grid that was really understood and discovered. Around the same time, some Russian researchers were doing their thing, and they were like writing for some very interesting scientific and academic magazines in Russia, and they believed, similar to the Native American creation story, that there was a crystal at the center of the earth originally, millions of years ago. Over millions of years from moving through space and attracting debris and dust and stuff from space, it eventually formed the earth. And they believed that the energy of this crystal could still be felt or detected on the planet surface. And they came up with this theory. Originally it was based upon the dodecahedron, but then they incorporated the icosahedron into the system as well, and kind of came up with what we can see here. And there's another version of it here, which is a mix of the icosa and the dodecahedron. Now the interesting thing about these Platonic solids is that they nest within each other. So the points of one will neatly fit into the middle of the face of another all the way around. So it's part of the whole system of how the Platonic and Archimedean solids work. This is what it looks like kind of on a modern map, the black lines forming that particular geometry. Another researcher in the 1950s had a very strange series of UFO sightings when he was flying passenger jets. He was a pilot. Bruce Cathy, following the example of French ufologist Aimé Michel, decided to look for patterns after he saw many sightings himself, and he got lots of reports sent to him because he was researching it at the time, and realized that all of them followed this grid pattern you can see on the right there. Every single sighting followed certain alignments, and he realized there's a grid across New Zealand where he was based, and he applied this to the whole planet and realized that if you put it around the whole planet, it formed into a system which was based on the cube and the octahedron. These are 2 other of the Platonic solids which Plato had originated, but were known about obviously many thousands of years before. And this is kind of what it looks like if you look at the white and the yellow lines, I think, on this particular globe. This was later developed by William Becker and Beth Hagans in the 1980s to come up with a more complete version of their idea of what a grid could be. Now, they saw it more as a kind of idea thing, more of a concept, a conceptual idea of how to see the Earth from a more spiritual and from a more esoteric viewpoint. And they worked at a university up in New England, and they got their students working on this as well. And they combined the Russians and Ivan Sanderson's and other researchers' work and put together this system, which was released in 1983. Which is a UVG, or Unified Vector Geometry Grid. And now it contained 4,862 points if you add them all together. They're not all on here, but certain things started to emerge, which I found quite interesting. We have this area here in South America, where the landmass forms around this particular vertex. We have the same thing here in Australia, where this is the Gulf of Carpentaria. We have similar things. This is the Bermuda Triangle. This is Hawaii, and we've got Easter Island down here. So we've got all the same kind of sites and areas of importance that the other researchers have put together, but neatly placed around the planet. We also have the northern part of Egypt here as well. If placed over North America, this is one of the faces. You can see this face here. This is what it would look like if you start joining all the dots. Now, this is more conceptual. I'm not sure if this is a reality, this is how the Earth works, but there's certain bits of evidence we'll see in a while that seem to suggest that if the Earth is close to a globe, which it probably is, then it does follow certain rules, certain universal rules, and many of these are geometric. What they finally came up with was this. And this is what they call a rhombic triacontahedron. Now, this is a specific geometry. It's based upon the icosahedodecahedron, but with puffed out faces. So these faces aren't flat, they're puffed out like a pyramid, and that's the point, the vertex at the top. And this is like, the reason they did this because it fitted the Earth better, and it made it stronger, like the ribs held it together, but that was based upon, partly on Buckminster Fuller's work with his ideas of strengthening geometry. This is their map, came out in the 80s over Europe, which is quite intriguing if you're interested in the sites. We've got Sardinia down here. We've got obviously kind of shapes around Britain. We've got this line here, which is almost identical to the St. Michael line, which goes up into Denmark and Russia and so forth. We've got other spots around here, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot going on here if you get into it. But again, these aren't necessarily ley lines. They're not necessarily marking ancient sites, but you can play around with it yourself. See if your house is on it, see if your favourite site is on it. You can go to Google Earth, search for Beth Hagen's UVG grid, and you can overlay it on Google Earth and have rather a lot of fun, like I have been over the years. Again, this is just another map of North America, giving more detail here. And there are some anomalies here, which I go into in the book. Obviously, the Bermuda Triangle, this area here, is probably the most interesting. And the thing is, we thought when we were writing the book, myself and my editor, John Martineau, we decided to put this to the test and we'll see what's going on other planets. If there is a system, if there's a natural geometrical system, John himself and John Michel before him, into sacred geometry, into 3D geometry, and they understand that universal nature, from the cells to the universal level, have hidden geometries within them, and in their growth, in the growth of flowers and cells, and even the movement of planets and galaxies. And so we looked at Mars to start with. The work had already been done on this by various researchers, and there was an interesting anomaly here. The Olympus Mons volcano complex sits at 19.47 or 19.5 degrees above the equator, much like Hawaii does on Earth, which is one of the most active volcanoes on Earth, but that's the most active volcano in the solar system here. And if you mark where that is, if you place a tetrahedron, one of the platonic solids, inside the Earth upside down, that's where it would hit the surface. And so that's kind of intriguing and strange. So where anomalies are happening on the surface of other planets is actually based upon internal 3D geometry. There's another image of it here, but also we have, this is Mars here, but also we have it on the Sun. We have increased solar flare activity on the Sun at 19.5 degrees. Obviously there's Olympus Mons there as well on Mars. We also have, interesting, another strange thing. For a long time it was thought that Jupiter's red spot was at 19.5 degrees, but it's not. It's actually at 22.5 degrees, which is interesting because that's quarter of a quadrant, i.e. quarter of a circle. In itself, that is an intriguing number. At 19.5, you also have a great dark spot on Neptune. You have thin white cloud bands circling the planet in the southern hemisphere and in the northern hemisphere at different times, strangely. This is intriguing. This is, I think this is Miranda, Uranus's moon, and strange pentagonal and hexagonal geometries on the surface, which is utterly bizarre, and triangular features. Whether this is just strange coincidence or whether there's some energetic stuff going on, we don't know. This is intriguing. This is still happening. It's been happening forever, pretty much. But there's a massive hexagon on the North Pole and South Pole, mainly on the North Pole of Saturn. Now this is twice the width of the Earth. The Earth's about that big. This is twice the width of the Earth. You can see it there. There's been other photos taken by NASA, and it stays still. It's like a stationary hexagon, and it's energetically a hexagon. And it stays still while all the cloud bands move around it, following this hexagonal kind of pattern. It's utterly bizarre, and no one knows why it's even there. It was only really photographed for the first time in 1981. If that's the case, if there's like evidence of like a cymatic or energetic system, then perhaps we can say the same thing about Earth. This just shows you how it moves around. The hexagon seems to maintain its composure whilst everything else tries to move. So there's something very, very bizarre going on in our solar system. This is Iapetus. This is Saturn's moon, and strangely there's a huge wall which is supposedly 12 miles tall and 12 miles wide, huge, going around the exact centre of Saturn's moon. No one knows how or why that even got there. So we're starting to see evidence of cymatics, which is really the study of how sound or vibration affects matter. This is, people like Hans Jenny and other researchers have been working on this for many, many years. And, does this apply on Earth? Is there some kind of relentless noise that the Earth or the solar system produces which will create these geometries? And apparently there is. This was reported in 1915. The mystery of Earth's low droning noise can now be solved, apparently. And this has been heard all around the planet, especially in Britain. There's actually a kind of phenomena called the Bristol hum, which made the news in the 1970s. Almost like a diesel car idling in the distance, they described it as, and no one's really understood what that was. But it seems that it could be to do with not only the movement of the Earth, but also the energetic systems we're moving through the solar system. We also have the aurora, or the northern lights, and these emit shrieks and whistles into space, which are called auroral kilometric radiation, when charged particles from the solar wind hit the Earth's magnetic field. Apparently, if humans had radio antennas as ears, we would hear lightning strikes emit a broadband pulse of radio waves. They're called spherics, tweaks, and whistlers, and they travel around the world by bouncing back and forth between the surface and the ionosphere, striking somewhere on the planet roughly 100 times per second. Strangely, they move along the Earth's magnetic flow lines, or the Earth's energy currents, and they're strongest at dusk and they change at dawn. So the connection with the Earth energies here is very, very interesting. So if you imagine you have these going on, which are imperceptible to the human ear, plus earthquakes, volcanoes, moving water, the whole wave system of the planet, high force winds, some crazy symphony could organize the energies of the Earth into a coherent, vibrating geometric grid. And this may have been what the ancients somehow understood. They might have tuned into this. So here we have the 5 platonic solids. Now here we have them represented over 5,000 years ago, carved in stone in northern Scotland, which is bizarre in its own right. This is thousands of years before Plato was even born. And here's some illustrations of 5 of them that actually represent the 5 different platonic solids. These were connected with the stone circles of Aberdeenshire, Orkney, and in other areas of Scotland, and just with 3 examples that were found in England. This is actually a Roman dodecahedron which was found in France, made of metal. And so these are fascinating examples of how even the ancients in northern Britain, Scotland, understood the nature of these geometries and meticulously carved them into stone. And it's known that each of these would take at least 40 hours of carving to make a simple one. And this has been tested recently by some researchers who I met at Stonehenge. And they display different geometries. They also display different patterns. They even encode musical frequencies, which is what some researchers have been finding out. These ones are actually on display in the British Museum, and you can see those for yourself. This one is currently on display at Stonehenge, so you can go and see that yourself. And these have been found, this is a place called the Nap of Hower on Papa West Ray in Orkney. Many have been found up in this area as well, and this goes back to 3700 BC. Some were actually found on Papa West Ray. But the interesting thing why I'm choosing this as a particular spot is because my good friend and colleague Nicholas Cope has written a book about this and found that the geometries encoded within here and the measurement systems, the metrology, indicate that the origins of these stone spheres, the megalithic yard and other geometric systems may have been founded on this small island off the coast of Orkney. We're going to be heading here on a tour in August as well. And this is absolutely beautiful site, and you fly from the mainland. It's actually the shortest flight in the world. It lasts just over like 2 minutes or something crazy. And but interestingly, if you draw a line between the Nap of Hower, it goes through many sites down here, but it actually directly goes through Avebury, West Kennet Longbarrow, and then Stonehenge. So I believe this line was the axis mundi. This was the prime meridian of Britain before Greenwich took the title of that. Other stone spheres, magnetic stone spheres, and we'll come on to why this is important soon, have been found in Ireland. These were found at Loughrea, and these are positively and negatively magnetic stone spheres, which were found. These are kind of very interesting. They're perfectly spherical, and they seem to have some kind of energetic, almost healing or magical effect, according to Michael Poynder, who wrote about them first. But spirals are also found carved on some of these spheres and at all these sites around the world. And this is the exact way that telluric magnetic currents of the magnetic field form and move within the landscape and get trapped and manipulated within these ancient megalithic sites. This is the most famous stone sphere. It's called the Towie or Towie Ball, with some of the most intricate carving. It's currently on display at the Edinburgh National Museum of Scotland. And amazingly, I found one. There's 420 of these have been found in Scotland and all around northern England, a couple in Ireland and so forth. And these are a big story. I've made a documentary about this you can watch on YouTube, and also a full lecture I've done on this. And I found one of these on display in Bolivia. And this was found right next to Lake Titicaca, not too far, within 50 miles of Tiwanaku. So what is this doing there? It's almost identical in the same size and shape, 6-sided sphere. No idea what that's doing there. It's absolutely baffled me. But this is it here, and you can just see I took a little bit of film footage so you can get a sense of the shape and size of it. But this is absolutely bizarre. So whether this was some kind of tool they were using, or whether it was something else, or whether there was some kind of influence going on around the world. But when I was there, I saw some carved stone faces that did look surprisingly Scottish. And you can see that in their grimace on their face. But the thing about these stone spheres that are found all over Scotland and other places is that master geometer Keith Critchlow, who wrote Time Stands Still, has actually put them all together, put them into a kind of one system which he believed that the ancients had an understanding of, especially up in Scotland. And it's exactly identical to the Earth grid system. Now, this is a bit of a chaotic version, but this is identical to what William Becker and Beth Hagans came up with the Earth grid itself. So that makes you question what was going on here. And it gets a little bit stranger. If you go back much further in time, there's an idea that was put together partly by Charles Hapgood, and and various other researchers. But even Albert Einstein was interested in this, with this idea of crustal displacement theory, where the Earth's crust, rather than being pole shifts, there was actually the crust would shift around, like the orange peel on the top of an orange, by a certain amount every, so many tens or hundreds of thousands of years. And it's believed that the old North Pole, according to magnetic testing within rocks, was actually in Hudson Bay. So we applied this, me and John Martineau applied the grid system, the Becker and Hagen's grid system, to where the old pole would be, which would be within Hudson Bay up in Canada. And what we found was suddenly many ancient sites, extremely ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Nabta Playa, Easter Island, other places, suddenly fitted in to this particular version of the grid. This is pure speculation, but it's interesting nonetheless if you're interested in the placement of ancient sites around the planet. Now, the Earth's magnetic field, this is intriguing. It's an interesting anomaly because it's just not talked about. It's not people aren't interested in it, but it has a huge effect on us. And on the surface of the planet, there are fault lines, earthquake epicenters, geomagnetic forces, natural electric or telluric currents, and these are all affecting us every day. And the ancients knew how to work with this, and they understood it. They saw the Earth as like an energy system, combined with the rays of the sun, obviously. And the Earth itself is thought to derive from convection in the outer iron-rich core, combined with the stirring caused by the Earth's rotation. The inner core of the Earth also rotates slightly faster than the rest of the planet. It's like playing catch-up all the time, so there's kind of movement and energy constantly happening. It also takes a daily beating when it's struck by gusts of solar wind, which you can see in the northern lights. It strengthens in the morning as we rotate into the sun, and weakens every night. And these energetic lines, these magnetic flux lines and telluric currents get charged up. And often they charge through the landscape every day, and that's what wakes you up in the morning. It's not necessarily sunlight. It's actually these underneath you, there's this constant movement of energy. And this just shows you the magnetic flow lines of the planet and how they move around the planet at different times of day and night. And the way it moves through the geology is intriguing as well, because if it goes through chalk insulators, it will go slower. If there's metal in it, it will move faster through it, and it will switch between electric and magnetic. A moving electric current generates a magnetic field, and a changing magnetic field generates electric current in anything present that will conduct it. So there's constant flux between these two systems. And this is found in ancient sites, even in North American sites, such as these chambers all over New England and New York State. Some tests were done by John Burke and Kaj Halberg, who were working, they wrote a book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, and worked with the BLT research team in Boston. This is Kent Cliffs in New York, and they found that often magnetic anomalies were underneath these ancient sites, and telluric currents would build up within these sites. And this is partly why they believed these sites were built, because not only was it could affect you personally, it could affect your consciousness and enhance meditation and things like this. If you place seeds and grains within the right spot within these chambers, it would enhance them and charge them up. And if you went to plant them against test seeds that weren't placed in the chamber, you get much higher yield, larger crop, and a healthier crop. And this was done many, many sites they tested all over North America and all over the planet. And then sometimes it's reflected by these orbs that are often photographed in these sites. This is a representation of the energies that they are recording. Even at Stonehenge in England, we have the same kind of principles at play. This is an electrical resistivity map done in 1995. And you can see this is the main entrance. It's also the summer solstice alignment, but that's the entrance in. You've got a ditch all the way around here. So the telluric currents, which move all over the chalky landscape, which they do very much in chalky landscapes, they kind of hit this ditch, and they only go a few feet below the surface. So if this is cut more than 3 feet below the surface, which it is, it will hit that and it will follow the path of least resistance until it finds a way in. And so the way in is here, and it will hit the stones and charge them all up. And pits were found in it at the highest point of charge where seeds were found. And they were some of them were burnt out because they had too much energy put through them. So it suggested that even Stonehenge itself was one of these fertility generators created by the ancient megalith builders. Same kind of principle is at play at Avebury. This is a reconstruction done by Nicholas Mann, and you can just get a sense of the scale here, because the smaller inner circles, each of those is actually larger than Stonehenge. What they found was, when John Burke and Kaj Halberg were researching here, bringing all their equipment here, over several days they were researching this, they found that every single stone in the outer ring had a magnetic orientation to the next one. And so somehow the ancients knew that when, they could work out the magnetic impulse or the orientation of the stone, and they would place it accordingly so it would fit with the next stone. And to be able to do that, you must have had compasses, you must have had some kind of technology to record that. So what that would do, that would move ions around in a circle, in a circular manner. This is very similar to the Hadron Collider in Europe, where they're moving ions around to create these different effects. And so the fact that you've got a similar thing happening here, the fact is these avenues here were bringing in earth energy currents. You've got the Michael and Mary energy lines coming in here, moving around, and it creates this whole network of energy. And this is what was going on in the ancient world, specifically at these stone circle sites. And this is what it looked like in total, more or less. Silbury Hill here, and the energy's coming in here. And there were massive processions, May Day rituals, and other such things connecting across the entire country. So we have Avebury down here, which is this area here. And these are the great Michael and Mary energy currents that were found by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst in the 1980s. And they found that it was like a male and energy energy lines weaving around each other, going through all these sites, including Avebury, Glastonbury, St Michael's Mount, and so forth. And that the ancients had some understanding of this. And these are all natural, these occur naturally all around the planet, and they were able to harness this for their own purposes. And this just shows you how Michael and Mary move through Avebury. They come through the avenues and so forth. Amazing. And we must remember that even Tiwanaku in Bolivia are virtually the same system. We have 99 stones at Avebury, we have 99 stones around the Kalasasai temple in Tiwanaku in Bolivia. Where the Akapana pyramid is, there's a massive magnetic field, magnetic anomaly right at the center of this particular pyramid. And so we have the same system. And Tiwanaku itself is flanked by 2 fault lines. It's got telluric currents moving all the way through it. It was right next to Lake Titicaca, and they were working with manipulating not only the natural earth energies, but also the water. They were pumping charged water through the pyramids to create electric charge, which they would place their seeds on, and that alone would charge up their seeds and grains. So it would guarantee fertility in their crops, and also alter consciousness. We even have this in North America. It's known that this is one of the most impressive dolmens I've ever seen in my life, but this is actually in New York State, in North Salem. And it's between 60 and 90 tons, there's different estimates, and it sits right on top of a negative magnetic anomaly. And it's been tested. They found if you place seeds underneath this particular boulder, this particular dolmen, again, the seeds and grains would get charged up. Here's me just wandering about so you get a sense of scale at this particular site. And these are different blocks holding it up. And you also have the piezoelectric effect of the great boulder crushing down on quartzite uprights underneath it. So the combination of this is quite intriguing. And then we have, this shows you the magnetic anomaly, the negative magnetic anomaly right underneath that particular site. And this is the book you want to get if you're interested in this, by John Burke and Kaj Halberg. Absolutely amazing. They did tests all around the planet at pyramid sites, other areas, in Tikal, various different places, and we're getting the same results, you know, slightly differing results, but it seems that all the ancient cultures shared this high knowledge. It was survival knowledge of the ancients. And one of the easiest things to construct to control this is the dolmen, and these are found all over the world. It's almost like the ancient people passed on this information, and the great teachers spread this around the world to maintain this, and not just this enchantment, to create this energy flow between sites, but also within the site itself to charge up the seeds and also to affect consciousness. And these are just some of the scientific tests they did to prove this was indeed the case. The ones up here were done at one of the chambers. There were controls, these were controls before, you know, that were not put in the chamber. These were the seeds that grew into these that were put inside the chamber. We have the same on the Lost World Pyramid at Tikal. Were not put on the pyramid, were put on the pyramid. So we see there are differences within this. And the Great Pyramid itself in Egypt, again, brilliant research by various people, mainly Christopher Dunn, found that they themselves, the pyramids, were crazy energy accumulators and distributors, mechanical, thermal, electric, magnetic, nuclear, and even chemical. There was so much going on within these, and there was a whole system that Chris Dunn writes about in the Giza power plant, where they were able to set them up, get the pyramids going, seal them up, and there would be like this constant energy flow, energy machine that could have fed the whole planet. It could have been manipulated so it spread from one ancient site to another and spread constantly around the planet between obelisks, standing stones, mounds, and other such things, even on different continents. But right underneath the pyramid is the great subterranean chamber. And I've been here a couple of times, but I went here when I was extremely sick. When I was here, I was actually inside the pyramid on December the 21st, 2012, of all times. And I was so sick, I got really horrendous food poisoning. But when I climbed down to the subterranean chamber, I became completely healed, 100%. I was not sick. 30 minutes while I was down there, I was completely healthy. The whole sickness had been neutralized. I was no longer nauseous. I felt energized. I was like, what is going on here? This is utterly bizarre. I came back out the chamber and I was sick again. I got up to the surface and I felt sick again. So it's almost like some kind of neutralizing energy, like the pyramid power was kind of sending this energy down into this subterranean chamber, and I was completely well for the time I was there. And we know that pyramids do have these particular effects. There's been tests done recently in Russia and Ukraine, and they've been building these fiberglass pyramids which are based upon the golden section, much like the Great Pyramid, or these are much more taller and elongated. And these are some of the results they were getting. They would find that water wouldn't freeze, increased strength of concrete, ionized plasma rising up above the pyramid. Seeds, again, were getting 20 to 100% growth increase. Increased resistance to mice with salmonella and tumor. Similar to me, I had like serious food poisoning. I got completely well when I was under the Great Pyramid, and increases in yield and so forth. And so we're finding that even just a simple pyramid construction does have these incredible effects. And I think that principle was applied everywhere on the planet. This is a quote from Paul Devereaux, who basically says the same thing, that ancient sites of power were sometimes found and sometimes deliberately constructed to mimic or enhance what could be found in nature. In either case, the forces of the natural world were used, and they were used for a variety of purposes, such as the promotion of fertility and for healing, but the overriding purpose was the need to have gateways through which contact with spirit could be achieved. In the ancient world, there were certain people who knew how to work with the physical world in order to create access to the spiritual. So there's like a combination of different things at play here. The same principles that would enhance your seeds and grains, and this has been tested scientifically, would enhance your brain chemistry and affect your different glands in your brain and give you out-of-body and visionary experiences. And so let's move on. Let's look at some other aspects of the Earth grid itself, lays and alignments. Some examples of ley lines. This is a classic one. This is the Apollo Athena or the Apollo St. Michael axis that goes all the way across Europe, pretty much, all the way down to Israel, a place called Megiddo or Armageddon. Starts at Skellig Michael, goes through St. Michael's Mount, and Mont Saint-Michel. These are three major Michael sanctuary islands, very important places. And it goes through many, many other Michael sanctuaries, and then it becomes Apollo sanctuaries the further we get down to Greece and into Israel and through the Mediterranean. And there's lots of oracle sites that are based upon exactly on this particular alignment at perfect latitudes apart from each other. And so there's lots going on with these straight line alignments. In Malta and Gozo, we have all sorts of things going on there, including elongated skull people, spiral carvings, precision megalithic construction. But they were also working with straight line survey alignments. And we have this here. This is the Sansuna dolmen we have up here. Then we have Gigantia, we have Bugaboo Temple. This is one I discovered when I was over there. And there's a tradition that the goddess giant Sansuna would stride through the landscape, dropping stones from her apron. And where the stones dropped in dead straight lines, it would create these megalithic sites. This is also a winter solstice sunrise alignment. And also we get the same principles, we get the same kind of design at Gozo as we get at Göbekli Tepe. And one of the things I've been researching is the relationship between important naval sites around the world. I came across this when I was doing a bit of work on Google Earth. The center of Enclosure D, which is the main enclosure at Göbekli Tepe, and the Coricancha in Peru these are both kind of classed as naval sites or center sites, axis mundis. The Coricancha is the dead center of the ancient Peruvian world, pre-Inca and Inca world, where all these lines come out, these keks they're called, come out from this center in the Coricancha. Belly Hill or Naval Hill is what Göbekli Tepe is built upon. But if you draw a line between them, it's exactly 7,928 miles. And when I saw that, that number jumped out at me because I knew that is the Earth's diameter at the equator, exactly, pretty much. And then, but I've realized this, but I remembered that John Michel used to talk about these ancient canonical numbers. And it was basically, if you round it down to 7920, you get this harmonic number between them. And it becomes 8 times 9 times 10 times 11 equals 7920. So you suddenly, and this is just the beginning of this whole understanding of sacred number and how the ancients would work with the measurements of the earth and multiplication, division and ratios between sites. And so this stunned me, because is there a connection then between these sites? Well, there certainly is. And in one of the other lectures, I'm going to go into more detail comparing these particular ancient cultures. We have more examples of what I call GPS BC, where there's like global positioning going back many, many thousands of years ago. Again, we see, for instance, we see the classic image we saw earlier marking the dead center. We find alignments between Giza and Newgrange in Ireland. And this line here, if we measure it exactly, it's exactly 1/10 of the planetary circumference, precisely. If we have a look at Newark earthworks in Ohio, which go from here to here, and the orientation of this, remarkably, if you draw a line through the exact orientation, which is the summer solstice sunrise alignment orientation, and continue it for just over 6,000 miles, it hits the dead center of the Great Pyramid, which is remarkable in its own right. Is that a coincidence, or is it deliberate design? That just shows you the immensity of the earthworks at Newark. And Ross Hamilton found that the shapes and sides of the pyramids actually fit neatly geometrically within the Newark, Ohio earthworks. So again, this is a remarkable discovery which suggests that even the ancient mound builders of North America had some understanding of geodesy and the relationship between sites around the planet. And even the latitude of, coming up from the equator, the latitude of Giza is about 30 degrees. But interestingly, there's a 7 system going on with Avebury and Luxor, which is, if you're into numbers, this is quite intriguing. Because if you go from the equator and you go 2/7 up from the equator to the North Pole, this quadrant here, you get Luxor. If you go 4/7 up, you get Avebury. But if you just take that again, if you start at the equator and go 1/7 around the planet, you get 1 Avebury, go all the way around. So 1/7 north of the equator is Avebury. And this is really intriguing because there's a system that a gentleman called Carl Monk put together called archaeocryptography. And he found that certain sites show their position on the planet. So if you divide 360 over 7, you get the exact latitude of Avebury pops up on your calculator, the exact latitude in degrees. And there's no way that should work, but it does. And it works with other sites as well if you start looking into it. And even in the local landscape, the 7s keep popping up between Stonehenge, Avebury and the Rollright stones between 51 and 52 degree latitude. So it gets more and more strange the more you look into this. And one thing that John Martineau discovered, that there's like these strange corners kind of at Avebury, and if you draw a sort of corridor between the centres of the 2 circles from different directions based upon these corners, if you divide that by that in degrees, again it ends up being 360 over 7, given the latitude of 51 degrees 25 minutes 43 seconds. And so this is strange, and the more you get into these numbers, the more you realise that the ancients knew exactly where they were on the planet when they were designing and building these sites, like a great survey was taking place. And that just shows you the dead centre of the circle. And this is one of the people, Robin Heath and Howard Crowhurst, who work with these numbers and are decoding and revealing the deep mysteries of the ancient megalith builders. This is a wall painting. It's a bit rough, a bit of a bad photo, but this is actually a wall painting at a site called Portsmouth in Ohio. There's like something like 8 miles long this whole earthwork system is. And this is what it looks like here, but it's about 4 or 5 times bigger than Avebury, but looks remarkably similar. Look, you've got this great circle in the middle with avenue coming off this direction, then another avenue coming off this direction to another circle here. And yet, why are these on different sides of the Atlantic in different epochs? Is there a connection between these different places? Certainly seems like there is. Stonehenge again, and again we're seeing great Pythagorean triangles linking sites across Britain, including Stonehenge, Arborough, Brinkelly D in Anglesey, long before Pythagoras was even born. We have 5, 12, 13 triangle down here, all discovered by Robin Heath, connected to Stonehenge, the Bluestone site of Stonehenge, and Lundy Island. So this is remarkable discoveries, and this is just the tip of the iceberg when you start looking at the way Britain especially was laid out in ancient times. We have an extension of this, a great earth circle linking Preseli, Stonehenge, Delphi, Giza, Mecca, Serpent Mound, and the Sligo megalithic sites. We also have this is a great earth circle discovered by Jim Allison like a couple of decades ago. And he found, this is very important because it's a formidable great circle. It links Nazca, Machu Picchu, Tassili in Africa, Siwa, Giza, Angkor Wat, Easter Island, and many others into one great circle, suggesting that this was part of the Great Survey of the Planet. This was also featured in the Revelation of the Pyramids documentary, which is well worth seeing. And so this very important discoveries that have been made over the last couple of decades. So this idea, I'm just going to finish this up with some sort of weird esoteric stuff. This is some of the ideas of John Michell. And this is an image we created for the book with my good friend Sean Kerwin, link all these different ley lines of the grid. Some known new discoveries. We have what's called the Circle of Perpetual Choirs here. This one is a speculative one, but this one here is traditionally links up sites in this great circle where you've got Glastonbury, you've got Stonehenge, you've got other sites, you've got Malvern in the middle here. And this is traditionally where people would chant and sing constantly. They would never stop, going from one site to another. So there was this enchantment, this harmony being spread through the land. Similar traditions exist also in ancient Egypt. So this idea really intrigued me, and some people think there may be one on the eastern side of the country as well. The centre is the Malvern Hills, the white leaf oak, it's called, a famous oak tree. But there are other ways to enchant the landscape. It's almost like the landscape has enchanted myself in the past, and still does really. Years ago, many years, I lived in Glastonbury, and in 2006 we built this stone circle. Mainly Sean Kerwin and John Martineau built it. I was kind of involved. I was helping organise it and the festival. And we kind of, forgot about it. A few years later, something like 2012 or 2011, we built this Woodhenge at this other festival site, the Sunrise Celebration site. We built that, and these were all aligned. These were all kind of astronomically aligned, energetically aligned with, different things. And then a few years later, me and Sean thought, hang on a sec, so we should, check the location of these. And we drew a line between them on Google Earth, and it went directly through the tower on Glastonbury Tor. This really stunned us because we were almost being guided by the land as to where to put these particular sites. And it made us realise very strongly that perhaps that the ancients were being guided by the land in a certain way, and that they were being influenced. And so that was how they would often place these sites. It was like it had a kind of like a natural, energetic kind of relationship between the human and the actual, placement of these sites. And this is where Glastonbury Tor is, down here, down this area here. Where's it gone? There's somewhere around there, Glastonbury. So that's where that is. That's the area we were working in those years ago. But interestingly, there's more to this, because I'm just going to finish up with some ideas about this terrestrial zodiac, which is almost like shaped and carved into the landscape around Glastonbury or ancient Avalon. And these are 12 different signs of the zodiac. You've got Leo here, you've got Libra here, you've got Scorpio there, and so on and so forth. You've got Cancer twins there, Aries there, Aquarius, and so forth. Then you've got this girt dog of Langport, it's called. And strangely, I used to live on the tail of the dog here, a place called Hewish Episcopi, and the road it's on is called Wag Drove, and I'm not joking. And the nose of the dog is Burramump, which is almost identical to Glastonbury Tor. This is Burramump. It's almost like a smaller version, perfectly aligned with Glastonbury Tor. This really intrigued us because there's a line, the Michael line, goes right through these two. And it also hits Aquarius and some other signs of the zodiac here as well. And it creates, with some other sites, this great diamond within the landscape. So there's lots going on in the strange landscape of Glastonbury. And there's actually earthworks, there's rivers, there's field boundaries, there's ancient paths, ancient sites, etc., that create these shapes in the landscape. This isn't all imaginary. And so this is the guardian dog, the girt dog of Langport. This is Wag Drove here. This is the road I used to live on. And you can see the shape here. You've got Burramump. And this is kind of the rough shape of the dog. And this intrigued me because here there's an old wassailing tradition where people go there at certain times of year and throw apples into the river here, the River Farret, to feed the dog, the great dog of Langport. And this is like a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. So this is really strange, really bizarre, but that's been known about for a very, very long time. But the strange thing is, some people noticed that there was something else going on and that the dog was hiding something. And back in the 1990s, this was outlined in the landscape, which is clearly a kind of horse-shaped figure, but it has Burramump now as its sort of third eye, and the River Farret marks its horn. So people believe this was a unicorn. Now people think, oh, okay, that's just all airy-fairy, it's all just like crazy stuff. But this town here, you can see the lion effigy. It touches the tail or the hind of the unicorn in a town called Somerton. Now why this is important to have the lion and the unicorn, and in the British coat of arms was created in this area here around Somerton. And what's on the British coat of arms? The lion and the unicorn. But the unicorn is chained up and is strapped down and is hidden, much like this has been hidden for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You can see this on road atlases. It's so clear. If you look, you can see this clearly on road atlases. So I find this really intriguing. There's all these little anomalies in the landscape. People often sneer at this, they don't take it seriously, but if you look into the more magical aspects of the landscape, you start to see these things. There's even a rider on the horse as well. And the head of the person riding is called I Am, right at the head, which is quite intriguing in itself. And so there's also names and places that match this as well. And if you continue this here, this goes up to Hinkley Point Nuclear Power Station on the coast, where you can see that from Burramump and Glastonbury Tor. And it's almost like, we must remember that one of the symbols of the unicorn is to neutralize negative energies and toxic energies. So how did they know this? Well, I thought this was quite an apt photograph I just stole from the internet. The dog and the unicorn. But if you continue the alignment across the landscape and continue it around the world, if you follow the horn of the unicorn around the planet, it starts here and it goes through Carramore, which is some of the oldest megalithic sites in Ireland. It goes through the old Hudson Bay North Pole and through Mount Shasta, which I thought was really intriguing. And this is an image of Mount Shasta. So possibly speculation, probably a chance discovery. But I think just the last few slides are giving an aspect of what John Michel always said, that there's enchantment within the landscape. The ancients understood it. They built these sites to maintain this enchantment. And it's up to us now to continue this enchantment and bring back this magical sense to the world. So thank you very much for listening.